Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another Work It Daily Executive Table Talk. My name is JT O'Donnell, the founder and CEO of Work It Daily. And today I'm going to be talking to Grazia Donvito about the number one mistake when managing uncertainty. This has to do with you, the executive. So folks, listen, it's been a heck of a couple of years here. And I can't imagine anyone listening to this not saying that they are dealing with uncertainty right now. And so I am thrilled to have an expert on this subject talking to us today and walking us through that. So let's bring her right up to the stage. Hello, Grazia. How are you today?
Hello, JT. I'm very well. Thank you. And you?
I'm doing well. And I'm dying to dive into this because obviously you're an expert in this area of coaching both, companies, executive suites, but also individuals through managing uncertainty. And clearly this is something you've become very passionate about. So tell me why. How did you get to this place?
Yeah, it's very interesting. It really started for me with the .com crash in 2000.
Sure.
Then evolved into the so-called Great Financial Crisis in 2008. And what I found was that there were patterns. There were patterns in the way things went, the way people reacted, and those that were successful and those that weren't. And I just became hooked on helping people by contributing to the sort of corner of my world that I knew about and had seen through actually hard-won experience. So yeah, I'm really dedicated and committed to helping companies and executives in this space.
Yeah, I can imagine. And it's funny because, like I said, with everything going on right now, it's more important than ever. But, you've talked about the fact that this requires more strategy than usual, and that this is something that you're seeing most executives not really understand. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, and you kind of alluded to it in your introduction. I mean, there is an elephant in the room, isn't there? The last couple of years, we've heard words that people have said, whoever you talk to, whether it's colleagues, employees, people out in social media, and they're using words like impact, trauma, disconnection, life-changing. And in the last year, we've seen people saying on and on that they want to get back to normal. And honestly, as my nieces or my friends of my family would say, you've got to really recognize, get real banana peel, it's changed. It really has changed. There is a new normal. I know others have used this term, but it's actually very true. And I think Tony Robbins sums it up best. We are now eating uncertainty every morning with breakfast. And I think this is probably the key here around uncertainty as a new constant.
Isn't that interesting? I never really thought about it, but we are really living through this definition of new normal. That term gets kicked around all the time, but
I know
this is it. And I like the eating uncertainty for breakfast as a visual, which just means from the moment you wake up, deal with it, right? It's so fascinating.
Exactly.
You talked about this example of executives, they don't value the implementation. It's not the sexy. It's not where the bonus money is, right? And that's what executives are. They're performance driven. They're in those positions for a reason. They're thinking about that securing profit. So I know I hear a lot of that. We want to get back to normal because they want to get back to that, right? Like being able to predict and pursue more profitability and feel like they're not off track, which has been the case for 3 years. Talk to us a little bit more about that. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? Is that, expand on that for us?
Yeah, I think the statement up on the board there now is really a statement around a disconnect that we see now between senior leadership and people on the ground. And I get that. I understand that leadership need to, if you like, divide labor, divide responsibilities, and they focus on strategy. But I think the pendulum has actually swung too far the other way now. There is such a disconnect between top leadership and potentially people that are doing the work and those that are people leaders, that there needs to be a rebalancing here. To be successful, it's actually an imperative. This is not a nice to have.
Yeah.
And leaders can't continue on the way they're going, really. They can't continue to point to other functions, although vital and supportive. It's actually a leader's role to do this.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that disconnect you've been talking about. I have heard from people who are saying, the executive suite is just talking a language that doesn't make sense to us. You know, it's like
Yeah.
they're not here in the trenches. They're not living it. They're in a different world, you know, and we know this starts at the top. So for them to be out of touch almost, right, is certainly a concern around that for sure. So you talked about the fact that you got into this really, I mean, have an incredible career, and we'll talk about that at the end, folks, in case you're wondering, but incredible street cred here. But 2000 was really the kickoff for you of this focus on uncertainty, and 2008 was really the true test. But you say, don't make the same mistakes that we made in 2008. Let's learn from that history. Talk to me about that. What are the mistakes that people could make again right now?
Yeah, so I mean, the numbers are pretty shocking. When you look up on the board these days, you can see Amazon, Meta, Twitter earlier this year. The numbers really remind me of 2008. And I think here's the thing, though, that there is an enormous amount of control around what you do with what your people see in social media and what you absorb. Because when you dive into some of these numbers, and I'm really not saying there isn't an economic challenge here, but what I am saying is you have control over the perspective of how you project those numbers. And then certainly in 2008, it was all doom and gloom. And people were really driving that message. Now, I think what people are saying as a consequence of feeling disconnected post-COVID and now going into this new economic, if you like, mega uncertainty, they are looking for some form of connection and understanding. And if you don't give it to them as a leadership team or as an executive, then they will fill that vacuum of understanding with what they see in social media and what others are saying. So let me give you an example. Amazon, the numbers that were announced with Amazon, in the very same research that I did just a day ago, the numbers looked at firstly, they looked at how much, they looked at how much Amazon was cutting numbers by. So that was 11,000 people. But when you go into the article, it also talks about a very interesting number, which is in between 2019 and 2021, Amazon had actually doubled its employee base from 798,000 to 1.6 million. So 102% increase in employee numbers. And we know why. It was because of COVID. They had to cope. Now we understand, and this is secondhand clearly from the article, that Amazon has cut back around 80,000 people. That's significant. It's shocking, and it's very, very sad if you think about every individual in that 80,000. I can't even imagine the families and the stories that are impacted by this. Equally, and we need to talk about that, but equally we also need to position that the glass actually may be half empty, but there it's also half full, which is that Amazon actually still has net more employees than it did have in 2019. I'm really not trying to write off what's going on. It is uncertain, and things are likely not to get not uncertain in the short term for sure. But I think it's important to say that leaders have in their control the way they message to employees. And it's this connection point that's really important. It's about being real, authentic, and raw, but having a position and a stake in the ground with how leadership want to communicate with their people. And that's what's missing at the moment. I spoke to the leader of a billion-dollar company earlier this year, someone I've worked with before. And he said to me, when I asked him about uncertainty, it's something HR is dealing with. Talk to them. And I was shocked. You know, this cannot sit with HR. HR is a fundamental part of support. They cannot lead this conversation.
It's funny you say that, because you and I were talking about this, and I really see the C-suite as two parts. So you've got the CEO, the COO, the CFO, coming up with the strategic vision, the way forward. And then you've got this, you know, the CHRO and others who they're the implementers, right? I guess you could even put the COO over there, but I do find the COO straddles both sides, whereas HR does really clearly sit in the implementation side of that. And so it does unnerve me to hear that that's where they're thinking that goes, because they aren't the ones truly driving the way forward, you know. And I don't know, that's so interesting to me. And anyone listening today, you know, if this is making sense and it's how it's happening in your executive team, you want to be having conversations with somebody like Grazia to say maybe we need to be rethinking this. Maybe that side of the executive squad needs to be thinking about that in the messaging. You said this early on, and you're driving it home here today. It's not a strategic advantage; it's a strategic imperative to do this with employees. Can you maybe give us an example, or just really talk us through why it's not a non-negotiable right now?
Yes. So I think if you just, again, look around, whether you've got the time to listen to webinars and read blogs, and even just on social media, even if you grab a soundbite, you'll see that there's a theme coming through in what most organizations are doing and have been doing for some time. And that is that they're clearly talking about things like headcount, layoffs, freezes, reviewing their functions. Do they look at IT? There's a whole commentary around what they call digitization, which really means, hey, where do we actually put things into self-service and take repetitive tasks away and make them more, if you like, IT focused, so people don't do stuff that doesn't take them very long. But what they are struggling with, and I would say this is almost wholesale around the conversations I've seen and been a part of and looked at, is that the real challenge is what they are now calling the employee journey. Now, that's another word for employee connection.
Yes.
And that is absolutely what no one has nailed. So my point really is that just to be at the table, to be an organization today, you need to do all the things that you're looking at, whether it is layoffs or restructuring or freezing or not. These are things that your competitors are doing. This is actually what everyone's doing. But the thing everyone is struggling with, because of COVID predominantly, but it was there before, we're all too busy being producers to notice because the times were better. We didn't have high inflation, we had low interest rates. Now things are getting real and more severe, and suddenly employees are coming into the frame. And you find that there are whole, if you like, groups of managers and leaders who have totally lost touch with how to connect with their people. And they leave it to somebody else. So to be different and be more successful, you have to get into the secret sauce of reconnecting with your people. That is where it goes, because actually, with our people feeling, if you like, disconnected today, if you can help them feel reconnected, you tap into something super important, something that cannot be bought with a wage or a reward typically. And that's the idea of discretionary effort. That thing that you see amongst some teams and individuals where they just go that extra mile for no extra pay, where they join the dots, where they watch your back way beyond what they're meant to do, if you like, with their job and role. That's what you have to tap into to have the strategic advantage. That is the imperative here, because we don't know what we face with uncertainty. And it's that sort of prowess and expertise, if you like, that everybody brings to the table. I don't really care what role you have. You bring that to the table, and that's what leadership should be looking for, this idea of discretionary effort. So I could go on about that. I've got some more.
Well, I know. And I've seen your amazing 90-minute webinar that you do for companies on this and how you dive into discretionary effort. But tell me I'm wrong. When you hear executives saying, I want to get back to normal, isn't that really the root of it? Don't they miss the discretionary effort that their employees used to have? And we've watched, right? COVID, you know, we've become a purpose-driven professionals. We had the great resignation. You know, people, you hear everything from quiet quitting to acting their wage, and executive teams are frustrated and saying, what's happened? Can we get back to normal? And normal being, where is that discretionary effort? How do I get my people back to that? And I'm assuming that's a lot of what you manage to. And I really want to take some questions from the audience around that. So folks, if you have questions for Grazia today, now is really the time for you to bring them up in the chat. And I'm happy to have her answer those for you. But, you know, I do want to ask you that, because you work with individuals who can work with you on a one-on-one basis. You work with groups, and you have this amazing training, which we'll talk about at the end, that companies can hire you for to get their executive teams to really be thinking about this. But I have to say that that first thing you probably hear from every executive is, what is going on? How can I get my people back to discretionary effort? Is there something, without giving away the secret sauce and diving deep into it, is there something, one thing you could speak to everyone here about what's happening there and what they can do?
Yeah, I mean, the key, I think, is really that the essence of getting back, and every leader should be writing this down, is that you have to look at purpose. So people come to work as a total human being. They don't come to work as, although we put our life to one side when we're at work, because I have this belief that most of us, if not all of us, come to work for an honest day's pay and an honest day's work. We want to do our work. But what's happened with COVID is there's been this disconnect, as we've talked about. People have seen the reality of what life can bring, that's sickness and unfortunately death. And so it puts everything into focus. And so people are starting to ask questions about purpose. And so for leaders to tap into what are the elements of purpose and how you can actually connect with people at a purpose level, that's the key. Yeah. And there's some fantastic research, and I implore people to have a look at it. I think the more people hear about it, the better. It's not new, it's actually quite old. But marketing love it because it drives people's behavior. And it's work by a gentleman called Deci and Richard Ryan. And they talk about this idea of positive psychology and what is purpose, and they break it down. So I would look at that research to get an understanding of what they're talking about. But people look for the same stuff. And if one of those areas is missing, then they don't connect and don't have purpose. And that's the key. That really is the key.
Well, and I bet you work with a lot of executives who are probably revealing to you, part of the reason that I can't tap into the purpose of my employees is I've lost it myself. The thing that executives aren't allowed to say right now, which is, guess what? We were all affected by the pandemic too. And we're all questioning purpose and, wanting to find our way back to normal, but deep down knowing, I don't think it's ever going to come, right? This is the new normal you spoke of. And so is it safe to assume that if executives listening to this work with you directly, that is part of the journey or process with you to help make sure that their purpose is tied together so that they can then, do that with their staff?
Yeah, I mean, I always start with any work that I do with the individual. It starts with the individual. See, the truth is we have everything we need inside us. We just have to decide to bring it to the fore. And so a kind of assessment of where you are, and it's not about deconstructing, because this is not about trying to make you better or stronger. It's about making you more whole and rounded and complete. So we always start with individual. I always start with the individual. Then I move into the external, then the team, then the organization. But first and foremost, it's the individual. It starts there.
Well, again, this is a good time to talk about this before we take more questions. So, tell everybody this 90 minutes, learning how to lead and manage your employees to success no matter what, right? That's living this uncertainty. Can you just kind of give everybody an overview of what happens in that? I mean, I've seen it. I know it's phenomenal, but tell them a little bit of what happens in that.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, I've distilled down what executives need to do to have this connection with employees and to drive the day job, get the results, get success and efficiency through a 3-step process. And the 3-step process is simple, but not simplistic. It's nuanced. And that's why we talk about it for 90 minutes, because we could just talk about the 3 steps in 5. But it's actually what sits behind those steps and the connection points that people need to really be open to and to get to have the success. And I take teams and individuals through, but predominantly teams, through the 90 minutes and examples and also exercises so that they get an understanding and can walk away with a practical tool set. Because see, at the end of the day, JT, we're talking about 3 things that need to shift. People need to shift things around mindset. So executives need to start getting their minds into the space of being more proactive in the way they lead, the way they walk the talk, the way they manage and lead by wandering around, which of course is new and nuanced because it's hybrid working. But there's also a tool set there is a tool set of what you can do, whether that's a workshop or an approach or a meeting, a structured meeting. There are things you can do to really focus your effort. And of course, there's a skill set, which is really about getting comfortable and, in a way, getting back to how you were, perhaps in a different time. And I understand there's lots of pressure. I'm not saying you have to somehow become a guru or a Buddhist or any of that sort of thing. What I'm saying is we learn to merge and adapt what we have to do in a slightly different way.
Yeah. It's so interesting. Folks, if you want to work with Grazia Donvito, obviously you want to find her on LinkedIn. That's an easy search. Make sure that you reach out. Let her know that you saw her here on Worky Daily's Executive Table Talk in your invite, so she knows to really connect with you. So I'm sure she gets a lot of connection requests, but you're going to want to customize that to make sure that goes through. And I want to bring up, we've got sort of, it's more like a question that I don't know that you can really, handle here in 10 minutes, but I'm talking about operational structure and operating under uncertainty. Is there such a thing as operational flow? Like, is there, because I think people are always looking for frameworks. Is that what we're talking about here in order to manage uncertainty?
Yes, we are. We are talking about an operational framework that is much more about process, a merging of process and structure. So let me give you an example. JT, you probably know, I led, as part of Brexit, a team at the height of 20. We had a larger team of 100, and we were part of transferring $4.2 billion US dollars of assets from the UK that was leaving Europe, going to Europe. So the idea was, okay, we didn't know. I mean, it was the mother of all uncertainty at the time. And it started as a legal program. There was a transfer that had to happen through a court process. It involved millions of stakeholders actually at an account level. And yet we didn't know the environment. We didn't operationally know what was going to happen and how we were going to do this. So we narrowed it down to understanding the structure of what had to happen, which was there had to be an end date of the 20th of September in 2018 at the time. And we worked backwards and said, what are the elements of this? So we created the structure of what the elements were. And then underneath that, we created the dynamic between the team where people could say, okay, today, here is the problem. Always keeping an eye on the end date, but looking at the problem that we face today, because it was the mother of uncertainty. We did not know operationally what it was going to look like. So we had the initial structure and we had the processes, and then through this idea of connecting with people and getting this discretionary effort, you can actually get people to join the dots. And so we had some real operational challenges because our infrastructure, our IT, was not fit for purpose. We weren't capturing the data that was required to report to the regulators post the transfer from the UK to Europe. We had big problems because the infrastructure was old and the data was not always as clean as it could be. This is a problem that we have across financial services and I'm sure other industries.
Sure.
So we dealt with this infrastructure in such a way that the teams came up with the responses. This is almost like a project management agile team. Mm-hmm. You go to the point that says, here's our problem. We currently have a round box and we have to design a square box. And we can't touch any of the operational structures to do it. So what are we going to do? And that's where you bring your people. And if they're motivated, engaged in the problem, and you've done your job as a leader, they will come up with a solution because they are using their discretionary effort. You give them the problem, you trust them, you give them the structure, you control by saying, no, guys, we can't go past this date, and then watch them fly.
Amazing. And the buy-in's there, like you said, because they have the autonomy, right? Which is really the key. So there's a fluidity there, truly a flow or operational flow, but you're guiding the flow. There's at least some sense of structure to it. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful thing. All right, I have a question for you. You're sitting here listening to this. What are some signs that your company is not managing uncertainty well? What can some executives be looking at right now and say, ooh, I think we need to talk to Grazia? What might they be seeing in their workplace?
Yeah, so I guess if you have people trying to talk to you and you're not talking to them, right? Whether they're emailing you, trying to knock on your door, if you're getting messages from your management team saying quietly, they may even be a bit concerned about bringing the message to you. Are they talking about risks and trying to explain that there's a risk that's on the horizon that might be of concern?
Right.
Honestly, if they're not looking at the environment and they haven't asked some critical questions of their own company, even if people aren't talking to them, then there is already a problem.
Yeah.
You have to say to yourself, with high inflation, with the redundancies that we're starting to see, or the layoffs that we're starting to see, with high interest rates, which are not going to go away, the projection is that they could continue for quite some time, the global uncertainty, the environment, all of those things, this is what's on people's minds at an employee level. And if you're not tapped into that and you understand that the whole person has this problem and this worry, and what are you doing for your part in the organization to take that into account? You don't have to become a, kind of a psychologist or a social worker. But if you're not looking at the fabric of your company to understand how you can better tap into what's concerning your people to then move to discretionary effort, to move to motivation. You don't have to solve anything, but you do need to have the conversations around what might be troubling people in such a way that it doesn't set you up to be the person that fixes everything, but it sets you up as someone who listens and does what they can. And you, in control as leader, can set the conditions for that. You can say, I want to have a conversation. I can't solve everything, guys, but I want to hear what's on your mind. Your people hold the gold. But the warning here is that if you do this, if you set off and ask your people what's going on, you have to be prepared to come back to them with an answer. You can't just take all this data, you can't take all this information, never go back. Unfortunately, I've seen organizations do culture reviews, surveys, people have been surveyed to death, and there's never any response back. There might be acknowledgement, a thank you, but there's never any response. Even if the response says, we just can't do it for these reasons, treat people like adults and equals, and you'll start to open up to potentially them feeling more heard, them starting to see some engagement and connection. If not purpose, there will be connection. And humanity right now, I believe, people are looking for connection. So we don't necessarily know we don't have our purpose answered, but connection's important.
So you just said so many gems I just need to unpack. If people are worried, if there's collective worry, and any executive here that thinks their people aren't worrying, like I'm going to be blunt, are crazy, right? You gave the data, you gave everybody is worried. And so to not acknowledge that worry is part of the problem. But more importantly, if I'm worried, how can I possibly have discretionary effort? How can I possibly move forward? Because that worry is like a set of handcuffs holding me back and making me feel helpless, because I could try to move forward, but if it's wrong, that could set me back, right? So it's that lack of confidence that is coming out of that worry that's making your staff say, why would I give any discretionary effort here? Why would I move forward? It's too risky, So I'm going to play it safe. I'm going to protect where I'm at. There's so many fascinating things to talk about, and 30 minutes with you goes way too fast. So
it really did.
It does. It's amazing. I just want to remind everyone, today I'm talking to Grazia Donvito. Her background is amazing. I hope that you will go over right now, search her, find her on LinkedIn, and send her a custom connection request. Say that you saw her here on Working Daily's Executive Table Talk with JT so that she can connect with you. She has this incredible 90-minute webinar that she does with executive teams. So if any of this resonated with you today, I would encourage you to forward this URL to your CEO, your COO, whoever, and say, maybe this is something that we should bring into the organization. I would also say, if you're needing this help yourself, if you're starting to be concerned, she works one-on-one, and you might be the catalyst for your organization. If your organization isn't addressing uncertainty, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't. And so the fact that there's a coach out there that specializes in this is at least someone you could start with, and probably through that process, as you get better at it, bring it into your organization as well. So please make sure that you go check it out. It's just incredible work that she's doing. And I love that you all have been here supporting this conversation. And so with that, Grazia, I'm just going to give you back the floor and say final thoughts, final words of wisdom for everyone listening today.
Yeah, I think everyone has the capacity to do what's required. You just have to have faith in yourself and your fellow man, really, even in an organizational sense. I know I'm talking more broadly, but organizations are made up of people first, structure and end result and success secondary. But if you fix the first, if you connect with your people, the secondary will follow. The success and the results will follow. They have to. Because of the way that it works.
So there you go, folks. There is hope here. In a time of uncertainty, there really is hope. I love it. I love it. Folks, thank you so much for stopping by today. We would appreciate it. What was your big aha moment? What's the big takeaway that you got from today's session? Please post that in the comments. And until next time, remember what we tell you. If you want to win, you've got to work it daily. So come back and see us again next time on Executive Table Talk. Bye-bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.